Ladies and gentlemen, we are live here at MythVision Podcast. Super excited about the show. I've been taking a little bit more of a keen interest in the idea of Islam, looking into this religion, trying to understand more about it, just like I look at Christianity. What that means is we're going to be critical. We're going to be investigating, looking at what are the problems with such movements, such cults. And I call it a cult because I've seen and met many people who cannot leave. They will lose everything, all of their relationships. And in some countries, it's even punishable by death. Those are things I'm sure you wouldn't call just a regular religion, just going down to the local Baptist church and saying, I'm done with this thing. The pastor's not coming over with a machete to the front door and ready to take you out. Well, there's a lot of extremists, and that's not everybody. I don't want to paint that to be the whole overarching picture, which is why in the description I've changed it to cult-like religion. There are some places that it's practiced and people are more pacifistic, not sure if they're being loyal to the words of their book, but either way, I like those people better, even if the book had a different meaning initially. Become more liberal if you're going to practice such things. That's my take. So today I want to go ahead and get us our intro, let you guys meet the gods for a second. This is totally taboo if you're a monotheistic Muslim. But here it is. Let's see what the gods have to say. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to need your support today. I'm going to tell you why that's important. This is one of the hot topics that you really have to be careful about talking about on the internet. It's really weird how many people, Twitter accounts get blocked, Facebook accounts, YouTube channels are really, really focused on when you start to talk about this religion. It's such, its practicers, if you will, are super sensitive to anything critical. Christians can get jabs all day long. I was a Christian, and I take jabs at the very religion that I once practiced. But the time you start to poke at, don't do it. Don't do it. Watch out. That's a crazy thing you shouldn't have to experience. So today I have a special guest joining me. Abdullah Sameer, welcome to MythVision Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
I appreciate you joining me for real. This is one of those touchy areas. I've noticed even when I interviewed AP, Apostate Prophet, it is extremely controversial to bring up anything related to Muhammad, anything related to the Quran, the Hadith, Islam, using these terms. You get real... I guess you say people are super sensitive and they don't know how to handle criticism, or they're not even willing to consider allowing criticism on the belief. At MythVision, I'd like to take my time to actually poke some holes, but it's not really about the technical details today. And you do know some text. I've watched some of your videos and I said, okay, he's aware of some of these problems. I definitely would be interested in getting your take, but I wonder if a PhD with some qualifications just adds the weight of the value of saying, look, this guy, what he's saying is actually accurate. I'm looking for critical scholarship. Maybe you can help me with that on people that that might be experts in the field who are critical of the text and not like, oh, I read this because it's my faith. And I'm looking to kind of use a scientific method. Now, let's get to you. If you don't mind, you are a devout follower of this religion, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Sure. So it all started, well, first of all, I was born into a very minority sect in Islam, which are known as Ismailis. Most people never even heard of Ismailis. They're like, what? Smileys? Does that have to do with smiling? Like, what is that? But Ismailism is a sect, but it's almost like a different religion. It's very different than mainstream Sunnism, which is what I converted into, and I'll talk about that. So I was born into this very liberal minority Shia sect that, you know, they don't pray 5 times a day. Women don't wear hijab. They pray 3 times a day, actually, which is convenient times. It's not based on the sunlight. They follow a living guide. His name is, they call him Aga Khan. So basically, he's the leader of the Ismaili movement. And it's sort of like a monarchy. So when he dies, his son becomes the next one and the next one. And he claims to be a descendant of Prophet Muhammad. So I was, and they're very, like, they're very different from mainstream Sunni Muslims. Like, they don't have any issue with they don't grow beards or anything like that. Like I said, the women don't wear hijabs. They're just like, when you see them, you may not even know that they're Muslim, because they tend to fit in very well. They emphasize doing like a lot of like volunteer work and charity. The religion is very convenient, right? They don't have any of these like restrictions, although some of them, they won't drink and, you know, smoke, and they'll eat halal food, but that's not, it depends from Ismaili to Ismaili. It's not really like a core tenet. They don't even talk about heaven and hell. I like, as an Ismaili growing up, I never ever heard any mention of hell or heaven. It was more a focus on how you live in the day, from day to day, being a good person, stuff like that. So I was in this kind of watered down sect of Islam. I grew up in this sect, but my mom was Sunni, but she wasn't really practicing. So then what happened? I grew up in my dad's sect. So then what happened was, in high school, I was introduced to the Quran, to more religious Sunnis. And my Sunni friends were like, you know, you should come pray with us. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. You guys pray differently. But I asked my dad. My dad was a very easygoing kind of guy. And he's like, yeah, however you pray to God, it doesn't matter. You go ahead, join them. You know, it's fine. And then as I became more exposed to Sunnism, I started to feel like this is more in line with the Quran. Right? And this is like the proper religion. This is the way I should be following it. Like, I should be praying 5 times a day. I should be like washing before I pray, because the Quran says before you pray, you have to wash or whatever, right? But in Ismailism, there's no such thing. You don't face a specific direction when you pray. The Quran says you should face the Kaaba, right? Like, all of this stuff in the Quran, Sunnis do, but Ismailis don't do any of it, right? Because they have this living guide that decided we don't need to wash anymore because we're spiritually pure. So they take a different kind of perspective on it, right? And so, and they take the text, the inner meaning of the text will only, basically they have a way of getting out of everything, right? But Sunnis, they follow the literal text, and a lot of it is based on hadith, right? There's no hadith for Ismailis, right? So because they have a living guide, they don't really care as much about what Muhammad said. They do care, but it's more in context of proving their religion rather than we follow what this guy said 1400 years ago. They have a modern living guide that that God is sort of guiding, so they don't need to go back to Muhammad.
So like anymore. A living prophet, so to speak.
Yeah, he's considered the light of God, right? And you know, some of the things are kind of funny, because I asked my dad once, I was like, so this guy knows everything. Like, this is when I was getting into Sunnism and I was starting to challenge Ismailism a bit, and I'm like, so this guy knows everything. Like, he has knowledge of everything that's going, because God's sort of like revealing or something to him, right? He's like, yeah. So I'm like, so he knows we're talking about him right now? He's like, yeah. I'm like, so if we call him on the phone, he'll say, hi, Sameer, I was expecting you to call. He was like, you know, he's like, faith is blind to me and I don't want to argue. That's what he said. He knew, like, he knew I had a point. That doesn't make any sense, because I also asked him, well, how come he got divorced? He didn't see that coming. Like, he's like, yeah, but he's a human being, and then he admitted, like, you know, for him, religion wasn't like, you know, he wasn't logical about religion. He didn't care. It was almost like a culture to him. He didn't really care. Like, he was just like,
can I say
he's sort of agnostic too.
This is something that's important as we go along. I might like point out comparison stuff. From my own religious background, like the hypostatic union, for example, with Jesus. It's like, hold on, not even the Son of Man, not even Jesus knew the day or hour, yet he's God at the same time, and he knows all things. So you might hear me like say, okay, Christianity does the same thing. Like, this is the same stuff happening over and over again. And so that our viewers who are probably going to come on and they're probably a lot of them will probably be Islam or practice Islam. They're going to look at this and go, well, this is just a jab at that. Dude, I jab at all things. So don't take it personal, but I want to point out how this is really not much different from what I've been poking at this whole time. So please continue. I'm sorry for interrupting. I just want to make it clear. You're saying the same stuff that's happening in all these other religions.
And that's what I found is, when you start like studying these things, you start to notice that there's a lot of similarities that apply across all religions, because it's the same sort of sham that's being played out in different ways, right? Like in terms of Ismailism, one of the bigger criticisms of Ismailism is that Ismailis have to give 12.5% of the gross wealth to the leader, Aga Khan. And he's a millionaire, if not a billionaire. He's considered one of the wealthiest people in the world. He has like, and to be fair, to give credit to Ismailis or Ismaili religion, like they do a lot of charity work as well with the money, but still it's not a fair system. Like obviously he benefits, he gets a lot of wealth from his followers. So it's a very, I don't agree with that, obviously. And I know my dad used to say that, he used to connect it to religion and say that, when you do this, you give this money to the mosque or to Aga Khan, then you get blessings in your life. If you don't, bad things happen to you. So there's some sort of like, negativity attached to people that don't. And even one of my other ex-Ismaili friends told me that, his wife was insistent they had to pay this money because, they attach it to like good things happening versus bad things happening. It's sort of like, I guess, superstitious in some ways. So it is a sham, right? In my opinion, and I'm against it. Sunnism doesn't have those issues, has different issues, but I'm more ex-Sunni than I'm ex-Ismaili, because Sunnism, I rarely became very religious. I was never a religious Ismaili. I was just like a nominal Ismaili. And then I dove into Sunnism. Sunnism became my life, and Sunnism shaped me into who I am today, which is, like a lot of my personality and the things I went through and what I'm talking about. It's all about Sunnism. I don't really talk about Ismailism much because, like I said, I was a nominal Ismaili, and it's a much smaller religion, and it has a lot less harm than Sunnism, in my opinion, because it's more modern, it's more liberal. They don't have the same. It's not as difficult to follow. You know what I mean?
As far as Sunniism, if you will, the other major, if you could use the term denominations,
sect.
Sects.
Yeah.
Where's Sunniism in comparison to those in terms of popularity?
Yeah. So Shias are probably like 10% of the population. Sunnis are like 90%. Ismailis are like 1%. Like that's small. Like they're a sect in a sect, right? So yeah, there's probably Sunnis are like maybe 85 to 90%. That's my rough guess. It's a vast majority, sure.
So you get seriously devoted to this. What made you jump ship? Did you just start taking your Bible, Quran more seriously? Like, did you just start getting more devout and say, the text says this, and you guys are doing something else? I'm going to stick with God's word.
Yeah, exactly. So my friends, my Sunni friends recommended, why don't you read the Quran? And when I was reading the Quran, again, I was starting to see that the way that Sunnis practice, and then I started going to Sunni events. So they invited me to go to like conferences and different things like that, and I was happy to learn. I'm like, I don't care. My mom is Sunni, like she doesn't really follow, but like I don't mind learning about this. And then they're like, you should start praying. So I started praying the Sunni way, and then as time went by, I read the Quran in full, cover to cover, and then I'm like, oh, this is God's final word. I need to follow this. Like, this is amazing. Like, why didn't I know about this earlier? Like, I always had a Quran in my house, but we never really read it. And then I started reading, I'm like, hey, I got to follow this, because, just imagine you have a creator and this is his last guidance to you. You'd want to follow it, right? You'd want to know what he wants from us, right? So I'm like, yeah, I want to know. I want to follow it. And so I started becoming more and more religious. My parents were like kind of concerned a bit, like, what's going on with you? My dad was like, why are you doing this? Like, and this and that. And, they were really accepting, loving parents, which is, I give them a lot of credit, especially my dad, because I left his religion basically, but he was okay with that. He was like, he wasn't happy about it, but he accepted it. And he's like, yeah, whatever way you want to follow God is fine. Like, he was that type of dad, right? So I didn't have any sort of backlash to leaving my parents' religion, or at least my dad's religion. And so I started praying 5 times a day. And I wanted to get married to a Muslim woman. At the office, I would go and find places to pray, whether it was in a stairwell or I'd book like a meeting room, and I'd be like praying there in front of, it was hard. It wasn't easy, right? Washing in the office washroom, it's awkward, right? Eating only halal food, like there was a lot of sacrifices involved. And then on top of it, because I was so devout, I wanted to promote the religion. So I started a major website, which was lightuponlight.com. This was, I think, 2001 to 2000. I think around 2001. Or was it between 2001 and 2006? I created this website. There wasn't any other website like it at the time. This was pre-YouTube. So at the time, if you wanted to upload videos, it was like a major production effort. You'd have to like rent a web server, or, purchase a machine, and you were paying hundreds of dollars per month. So I'm like, how am I going to fund this? I created a little business, a web hosting business, to provide income for this. And I created probably one of the first video websites that was free of charge for anyone to watch Islamic videos. I used to go from mosques to conferences recording. I bought video equipment, and this became my thing. I wanted to promote Islam however I could. And so this was my life. And eventually, like I said, I married a Muslim convert, and we centered our life around Islam. This was the focus of our life. I was always telling people about Islam at the office. My younger brother also converted from Ismailism to Sunnism. And even one of my family members now told me after I left Islam that, they wish that I never converted him, because he stayed as a religious Muslim. And I was able to free myself of those shackles, of that difficult, dogma that was burdening my life. I was able to buy a house, and do all these things I could never do as a Muslim because interest was forbidden. Buying a house, religious Muslims don't buy houses on interest. What they do is they save the cash. I actually know one guy that saved cash to buy a house. And because he did this, he missed out on like huge opportunities. So he lives in Toronto. And if he could have just got a mortgage, he would have had like a house that was worth millions of dollars now. But because of his dogma, he was saving cash. And eventually he bought a house far away from Toronto. His commute, while we were still commuting before COVID, was like a good 1.5 to 2 hour commute one way. His house is not worth anything close to what it would have been worth in Toronto. And all of this is just because interest is forbidden, because Muhammad 1400 years ago decided that he thought interest was bad. And, Islamic scholars, continued that tradition of forbidding interest to this day, even though there's like literally no harm in a mortgage to anybody involved. Like the bank benefits, the buyer benefits, there's no loss to anyone. It's like it's actually a mutually beneficial purchase to everyone involved, right? The bank is protected, the owners put the deposit, they gain value. The interest rate is so low. We're talking like 2%, 3%. Like it's a win-win situation, right? Yet Islam, because of something that Muhammad said 1400 years ago, before they even had house mortgages and in a totally different environment and situation, that is actually hurting Muslims today. That's the sad thing.
Wow There's a lot here. So are you talking to somebody?
Yeah, I'm just telling my son, shh.
No, you're good. So you said something about you were able to free yourself, and we're going to be getting into what maybe caused that. But it sounds to me, I want to address the elephant in the room. I put it in the description, and I said about leaving this cult. And there was a person's comment, UGI, I think it was, said, it's not a cult. So then I said, okay, cult-like religion, because it's in the vein. It seems like some people like these, the Smileys? The Smileys, they seem to be a lot more liberal and chill and not quite as much cult-like stuff. But don't get me wrong, the stuff you already described about money and 12.5% and all this is like starting to sound kind of cultic already. And this is the liberal versions of this type of religion. So when we get into Sunnism, and this is a more extreme, serious, devout version of Islam, can you tell us, is this a cult? I mean, based on the bite model or something, like, is this a cult? Simple as that.
Okay, so can I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I have something to show you. This is an article I wrote. One second. So I wrote this article called "Debunking the One True Islam Fallacy," and I think this is very important to actually explain. Islam is so different for everyone involved, and this is so important to understand that everybody has a different version of Islam. Everybody follows a different. Sorry, I shared the wrong window. Everybody, but I shared the link as well. Everybody has a different version of Islam that they follow. There's Sufis, there's Sunnis, there's Shias. Even among Sunnis, there are people like myself who were deeply entrenched in this system to the point where when I left Islam, I had people tell my wife, first of all, let's talk about that. People told my wife, her friends, you have to leave this guy because he is now a non-Muslim and you cannot be married to a non-Muslim and he is going to corrupt your kids. Now, the funny thing is, as a non-Muslim, like, I understand that non-Muslim men are not allowed to be married to Muslim women, or Muslim women are not allowed to be married to Muslim men. But the thing is, I'm still going to be the father of my kids, no matter what. So, like, what difference does it make whether I'm married or not married to my wife? That's like the personal issue. That has nothing to do with the kid. The kids will still be my kids, and I'll still parent them and raise them. Of course, there'll be like, custody and different things that happen when a marriage breaks down. But this is, again, like a cult-like thing that you're mentioning, right? Mm-hmm. Another example of like cult-like thinking or like treatment is that one of my friends told me, this was a good friend of mine. He started crying when I left Islam. He said, I would never have, I never expected that you would ever leave Islam. And I thought, you were going to be Muslim for your whole life. And what really got him is that I created a blog. This is even before I created the YouTube. I just created a blog, abdullahsameer.com. And he's like, because you created a blog on Islam, I'm not going to help you move. He actually volunteered that I didn't even ask him to help me move because he knew I was moving houses. And he's like, well, I'm not going to help you. And I'm like, why? Because you're attacking my religion, right? And so you're my enemy now. And this is sort of this us versus them hostile thinking that you find among Islamists. Islamists are people that follow Islam. They follow Islam politically. Right? They consider Islam not just to be a private religion, but like a political movement that needs to be established. And there's Islamic laws, right? For example, killing apostates, for example, chopping off the hands of thieves and stuff like that. So there's laws as part of Islam. And among Muslims, you have many different people that look at it differently. The vast majority of Muslims don't give a shit about Sharia law, at least in the West. I'm talking about in Canada. I grew up in Canada. I'm talking about Western Muslims. Most of them, 99%, they don't even pray 5 times a day. I'd say maybe 20% pray once a week, Jummah prayer, Friday prayer. If they go for just like Sunday, like you go to church, I'd say maybe 20% or 10% go for Friday prayers. Probably not even that. Probably 5% or less than that, or maybe even 1% pray 5 times a day. At the office, at home, waking up for Fajr at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning is very difficult. Maybe 1% do that. So we're talking about the vast majority of Muslims don't really give a shit about Sharia law. They just pray when they want to pray. Most of them care more about halal food than alcohol. So you'd find even Muslims will drink alcohol, but they will never eat pork, ever. It's even ex-Muslims have a hard time eating pork. Because it's like somehow, I don't know how it attaches itself to your brain. It's like a disgust mechanism or something. It's like, ew, that's disgusting. I can't eat that, And it's very hard even for some Muslims to eat bacon. Like eventually, it took me a long time. I started eating pork and everything. I'm like, yeah, it's just another piece of meat, just like, beef or anything else. So now I eat it. But like in the beginning, I'm like, why am I so disgusted by this? It's like some sort of, the way it kind of attaches itself to your brain is funny. Whereas I was alcohol or stuff like that, I was like, yeah, whatever. I tried it. I'm like, yeah, whatever. So that's a key thing to note. The practice of Islam being a cult varies from individual to family a lot. Like my mom is not at all in a cult, at all, 0%. Like she prays sometimes. She doesn't wear hijab. Maybe sometimes she covers her hair. She doesn't care about Islamic law. She got a mortgage, which was haram, forbidden. She still did it. I even told her, you should sell the house. This was because I became religious and she wasn't religious. And I'm like, you should sell the house. This is forbidden. You should change your job. She's like, shut up, man.
Did you actually try to convert your parents? I mean, like, you got so serious that you tried? Oh,
and
wow.
You know, a lot of people become like, they create, they cause a lot of conflict in the family when they become religious or they convert, because what they do is they end up creating enemies out of their parents, because their parents are not religious and they become religious. And so I did that a bit too. I created a bit of hostility, in my family, because I was like pushing them. I'm like, yeah, you have to do this. If you don't do this, you're gonna go to hell, and you're gonna be in trouble, and you have to be a good Muslim. You can't have a mortgage. But my mom was just like, yeah, whatever. And at the end of the day, I was like, yeah, it's her choice, and it's my dad's choice. And I was worried my dad was gonna go to hell because he was in the wrong sect. And so I did create a bit of conflict in the family when I became so zealous, right? I mean, that's what zealots do. They are fundamentalists or whatever. But that's why I don't necessarily say Islam is a cult, but there are cult-like, let's say communities, right?
Would you say as an ex-Muslim that anyone who takes the Quran seriously for what it actually says would follow in a fundamentalist path? I mean, would end up saying, okay, this is what it says. I'm going to be true to the Quran and the Hadith and what, you know what I mean? Like, if you're going to be serious.
And that's that's another problem again, because see, when I first left Ismailism and I became Sunni, I was convinced that Sunnism is the proper Islam, right? And I was convinced that this is the true Islam. But that's why I wrote that article, because I've changed my views like significantly after leaving Islam and like pondering on these things. There is no true Islam. Every single version of Islam is a man-made interpretation and a best effort basis to try to come up with the truth of what God wants from us. I'll give you an example. Some people and some people will insist that ISIS is the only true Islam, and I had many ex-Muslims arguing this with me, and many years ago. One of my good, I won't mention, he's quite a famous ex-Muslim, and him and me were battling this out. And I said, listen, how could it be that ISIS is the true Islam? He's like, yeah, but they follow the Quran and the Sunnah specifically more to the letter, right? I said, but look, how do we even know whether the actual hadith are true? Even Muslim scholars debate which hadith is actually from Muhammad and which is not. So every single person that's trying to implement Islam is making up an Islam. They are creating versions of Islam. The version of Islam that ISIS follows is more heavily influenced and more based on taking the hadith at the way that Muhammad interpreted, the way that Muhammad said it in today's day and time. But I'll give you an example that shows that Islam is not that static. There is a hadith that says that, now this is obviously Muhammad making a mistake and trying to cover up his tracks, but look how Muslim scholars take this. Muhammad told these people, this was kind of a sad story. He said, we're going to march on Banu Qurayza, the Jewish tribe, and do not pray Salatul Asr, the middle prayer, the noon prayer. Do not pray until you reach there. Now, of course, for an army to get up and get ready and go, it's not instant. It takes some time. And some people will be lagging, some people will be delayed, and some people will leave right away. So then they had a dilemma. They started walking. Half of them, they're like, okay, the time for Asr is ending. If we don't pray now, what's going to happen is we're going to miss the prayer. So what do? Do we pray now and disobey the Prophet? Because the Prophet said, you need to don't pray until you get there, right? But it's now basically time's up, right? And you're not allowed to miss the prayer, right? So what do? So they had an argument. Half of them said he didn't mean that. He meant, well, when you get there, if you get there on time. And the other one said, no, he said don't pray. So half of them prayed, and then half of them skipped the prayer until they got there. And then when they went back to the Prophet, and they said, well, what do we do, right? He said, both of you were right. But this is used as proof to say that there's people that take the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. Like some of this is an example where the spirit of the law was, hurry up and leave. The letter of the law was pray right now. Don't pray until, even if you miss it, don't pray. So this is a question, right? Because this hadith is used by Muslim scholars to show that you can't even take the hadith literally necessarily, because it has to be interpreted. Which hadith are meant to be for all times versus which ones are only for that specific time. There's another example where the Prophet said, whoever's pants or like garment goes below the ankles for men, it's in the hellfire. Now this is kind of crazy, right? The Prophet's saying that you can't wear your pants past your ankle. So some Muslims to this day, they cut their pants. They cut their pants to the past the ankle.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
They cut the pants short, so it looks funny. And like, why did they do this? Because of that hadith. But there's actually another hadith that says, well, Abu Bakr was wearing his pants long, and he asked the Prophet, why is this? He said, well, people will let the garments drag in the sand. They used to do this out of arrogance. So scholars say that this was a sign of arrogance, and I'm better than you guys. I can I have so much money that I can let my clothes drag in the dirt. This was like a very culturally, related to specifically 1400 years ago in that specific place and time. But today, some people still don't, they still cut the pants short. But there's other examples where there's other references that say, no, this is only if you're doing it out of arrogance. And obviously today, that's just the style. So there's a lot of examples like this where, what do you do? It's all man-made at the end of the day. So you can't say there's one true Islam. I'm very much against the idea that there's one version of Islam that's best. The Ismailis, they've just made different interpretations. And yes, a lot of it, to me, especially when it comes to Ismailism, it's such a stretch that's incredibly dishonest. They will say when the Quran says you can't drink alcohol, they're saying this means getting drunk on the love of this world or something. Like, it's a huge stretch.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, look, you gotta, let me say something positive about that though. Even though we know, if you're gonna be technical, we know it's BS. They're making a stretch, and I get it. But you gotta say, at least with these more modern liberal approaches, that they're not as extreme, which means they're a lot less harmful, and they get along with the modern world a lot better than what you see with this, middle age, really ancient version trying to interpret a war mentality. Because it sounds to me, for example, just sticking to ISIS for 1 second, they're looking for what makes them be allowed to conquer and destroy the enemy and whatnot. It's like almost like they're bloodthirsty in a way. I could be wrong, but it sounds like they're looking for, like, okay, Muhammad cut this guy's head off. Hey, we got to do the same thing. I don't know that. I'm just saying it sounds like they're looking for things that kind of validate their war mentality. Whereas if you're looking for peace, you can look for that and find that, and then that'll be your interpretation of things, it seems.
So there's also another extreme to this, which is that ISIS has nothing to do with Islam, which is what most Muslims say. The vast majority of Muslims will say ISIS is not Islamic. Well, for God's sake, it's called the Islamic State. It's Islamic. So going to that extreme is incorrect too. ISIS has precedent for almost everything they do from the Islamic teachings. So it's not like they're making up, or they are cherry picking, but everybody cherry picks.
Right.
But is it plausible? Is their interpretation of Islam plausible? Hell yes. Their interpretation of Islam, even though it's not the mainstream, and of course it is a very much an extreme interpretation, it is one plausible interpretation of Islam. And it is a plausible interpretation. I say that it's not just like, it's not stretched to infinity like Ismailism is. Okay. Ismailism, in my opinion, is less plausible than ISIS. I'm not saying ISIS is true Islam, because ISIS is, again, it's just one interpretation, but it is a valid interpretation, and Muslims will not, of course, deny that, and they will argue that there's why ISIS is wrong, and they have their points too. But that's what happens when you're working with flawed texts. Wow. You're gonna have disagreements. because it's not from God. That's the problem, right? It's contradictory. It's like one thing says, one version says this. I mean, one text says this, the other hadith says the opposite, Quran says something else. Well, what takes precedence, the Quran or the Sunnah? Sunnis will say the Sunnah. Others will say no, the Sunnah cannot like cancel the Quran. The Quran comes first, but Sunnis don't say that, of course. So it's like a big mess, right? And of course, my point is that if this is truly from God, he created this big mess. He left, humanity in such a situation that the worst, most horrible groups can find inspiration from your religion, your book. So how is that from God? Like, if this God cannot be a good God if he truly exists, because he left a mess. I mean, that's my point. If ISIS can find a way to make their religion, and by the way, ISIS can out debate, I'd say, like a lot of like other scholars, because they have they have precedence. The texts are horrible. They're like violent. They're nasty. That's why you're saying cult, because of what exists in the religion is truly horrid, right? And of course, modern Muslim scholars have found a way out of this. If you want a book recommendation, which you will love, which really goes into this dichotomy, it's The Way of Strangers by Graham Wood. Graham Wood is the Atlantic award-winning journalist that interviewed a bunch of terrorists, you could say, extremists. He went to Turkey, he went to Pakistan, he went to Syria, and he got into the mind of like Al-Qaeda and these people, and he explained like how is it that and he asked other Muslims like Yasir Qadhi and Hamza Yusuf, like modern Muslim scholars, how come you condemn ISIS, on what basis? And it's funny to see the cognitive dissonance. You should read the book. It's an amazing book. Like,
you got me really wanting to check that book out now. I mean,
yeah, he at one point he asked Hamza Yusuf, like, how do you condemn? He kept asking him, right? And Hamza Yusuf was a famous Muslim scholar, was 100% against ISIS, and he's a Sufi leaning scholar. He was like, he stood up and he pointed to the certificate on his wall. You see this? You see this? This is my ijaza. This is my permission to teach Islam that I got from my teacher. We got it from his teacher. We got it from his teacher. We got it from the Prophet. So I have a chain of authority going back to Prophet Muhammad. So it was basically an appeal to authority. There was no reason there. It was just an appeal to authority. And Yasir Qadhi, of course, was a Salafi. But so Salafism is closer to what ISIS follows. It's more rigid. It's more by the book. It's more like black and white. Even he condemns ISIS, but he has his own different way of doing it, which, again, it's cognitive dissonance at the end of the day, right? It's like there's no real reason why you can say they're wrong and you're right. It's just a man-made interpretation at the end of the day. It's your best effort basis on trying to figure out what God wants from us, right? And unfortunately, ISIS is one of those interpretations, which is why a white guy in the middle of Texas who has no Muslims living around him, his mom gave him a Quran. He became one of the top guys in ISIS, John Georgalis. And he interviews John in his book. He interviews his wife, Tanya Joya. I've interviewed Tanya on my channel as well. His wife ended up becoming ex-Muslim. She ran away from ISIS. She escaped and she came back to America. She got asylum. And she's an ex-Muslim. So like his wife, like it's crazy. Like the thing that if someone like that can become a terrorist just by reading the Quran, like that just shows you how bad the religion is. Again, I don't say cult because the danger in saying cult is because you have 1 billion Muslims in the world today, and it's just too reductionist to say cult. So you have to be careful. But there are cults,
it's not one thing. Yeah,
exactly. It's not one thing. And by the way, one more thing, you can see how passionate I am about this.
I love this, man. Thank you too, by the way. I appreciate your passion.
Yeah, you're welcome. The reason why I'm also so passionate about saying there's no one true Islam is because this is used as a method of bigotry against Muslims. People like to say, not you, but there is a group of people. And I at the moment on Twitter, I'm like, there's a group of people that have like red flags, and they tend to be from India. And they, like, for example, there was a tweet that I just shared that this guy was like basically attacking one of my ex-Muslim friend activists, Haris Sultan. He was saying one can take Muslim one out of Islam, but can never weed out Islam of a Muslim. He's saying, even if you're ex-Muslim, you're never not Muslim enough for us. There's millions of people like this in the world that, and his Twitter handle is not your average Hindu. So according to this not your average Hindu, you can never be not Muslim enough. Even if I say I hate Muhammad, I don't have anything to do with that religion, I'm an atheist, you're still Muslim. I'm still Muslim to this guy, because to them, they see Muslim as like almost like an ethnic identity, and to them, Muslims are the enemy. So this, and to them, Islam is like a ticking time bomb, which to some extent they have a point. But the point is, not all Muslims follow it that way. So if you're gonna say they're just not proper Muslims, that's just wrong, and that's an excuse to be a bigot against, you know, like people like my mom or my aunties that they don't even care like really about Islam. It's just like a cultural thing for them, right? But to them, they're as bad as ISIS. That is what I have a problem with.
That's I think that's fundamental. That's like some form of fundamentalism that doesn't see the nuance in humanity, just the way the world works. So I'm with you 100%. Let me ask you this, a couple details, if you don't mind giving us this, because it's obvious you're not a Muslim anymore. What happened? Like, because most people I talked to had a gradual deconversion. Like, it was like one thing made me go, hold on, planted a seed of doubt. Then another thing came and it's like, now I got multiple things I'm trying to figure out how that works in my religion. And then it's like, oh my gosh, something at some point, light bulb goes off and you're able to see it. What happened? What was it that convinced you to say, okay, I'm leaving. This is not the true religion. This isn't true.
So believe it or not, this whole thing started with a Facebook comment. Like me leaving Islam started with a Facebook comment. That's it. How did that happen? I'll go into details.
Okay.
So I was Muslim. I was a religious Muslim. And one of my mutual friends had another friend that was, I think he's atheist. And he basically posted that I almost became Muslim. He almost converted to Islam, but then he realized that a lot of like the stories in the Quran were copied from Jewish myths, right? I'm like, oh, that's easy. I can teach this guy. Like, come on, what do you know? This is an easy problem to solve, right?
So you were in debating, yeah.
So I wasn't like going out to debate people. I was just like a religious Muslim. But this guy said a comment that I thought, you know, I want people to go to heaven. I want good for people. I don't want anyone to be on God's bad side, Allah's bad side. So I want to help people. And this guy, he almost converted. Hey, this is interesting. Like, let me help him to, maybe he'll convert, right? So I'm like, okay, look at this. I said, okay, let's talk. And I started DMing him and I said, like, what do you mean Jewish myths? And he's like, yeah, you know, the Talmud or whatever. I said, but listen, that's obvious. That's an easy one. The stories in the Quran, they're not Jewish myths. They're stories from God of the true prophets that, you know, blah, blah, blah. And just it's confirmed in the Quran. It's not a Jewish myth. And he's like, yeah, but listen, these stories are not coming from the Torah. They're coming from the Talmud. And I'm like, I didn't even know the difference. I'm like, I looked it up. And he's like, it's like a collection of like stories of rabbis. A lot of them are just like stories, right? They're not from God. They're just like, yeah, there was this guy and he did this miracle. And then it ended up in the Quran. Like a lot of these things ended up in the Quran. So I'm like, okay, now this is a little bit tougher than I thought. I thought
you can say that the Bible is the word of God to some degree, but you can't grant the Talmud. Right.
Yeah, but it gets a little bit more complicated, which is why I don't use this argument as my go-to argument against Islam, because the Talmud could be considered as some oral revelation or something. But the point is, there's a lot of stories in there that are like, they're obviously made up stories, but they end up in the Quran. And now here's a question. Like, for example, there's a story of Abraham. If I'm remembering correctly, he caught up some birds and he told God, bring it back to life, for example. It's like some like apocryphal stories like that. Jesus talking as a baby, which we know now is in the infancy gospel of Thomas, which is not at all like considered like part of the actual Bible. But it to Muhammad, he thought it was like a good story and he included it in the Quran. So there's a lot of examples like that. There's a lot of examples. Abraham was thrown in the fire but it didn't burn. There's tons of examples like that, right? And like Cain and Abel, and there's a crow digging up. So now I'm like, this is getting tougher. And so it started me on a journey of like looking into more issues into Islam. And then I started to have a bigger problem, not just with this, but with the whole story of Dhul Qarnain. Dhul Qarnain is a king in the Quran. Dhul Qarnain means the one with two horns. And he went to the edges of the earth, the east and the west. You know, Muslims say he went far east and far west, not to the edges, but he went far east. He went to the place where the sun sets, and he went to the place where the sun rises, which again,
yeah, where's that spot at? I want to go check that spot out.
That's interesting. Yeah, like how do you travel? Because again, like the story says to fall apart on a globe. On a flat earth, it makes a lot of sense because okay, you went to the place it sets. On a globe, how do you go to the place where it sets? You can't, right? It just keeps moving. It's like going to the rainbow, the end of the rainbow. It'll keep moving, right? You can't reach it, right?
It just keeps going.
It just keeps going. So this started to create problems for me, and then I found out that, well, there's the story of Dhul Qarnain. It says that Gog and Magog, which is also in the Bible, are these like creatures or like, you know, this like hordes, like orcs that are like under the earth, and every day they're digging, trying to get out. So now my logical brain, you know, I do have a logical brain, even though I was following the religion. I'm getting cognitive dissonance. I'm like what? There's like millions of people that have been here for 1400 years. They're trapped between two mountains. And I'm starting to read content against Islam that says, well, this makes sense on a flat earth. Here's a map of flat earth. And, you know, they're trapped between the mountains and the ocean. And again, then I saw that the Dhul Qarnain story, it matches point for point the Alexander Syriac romance, Alexander the Great, the one with two horns. There's coins of him with two horns. It's like starting to fit up the myth. It's a myth.
Wow.
This story is a myth. It's not at all. And then I find out the historic Alexander. So I'm kind of jumping the gun. Okay. So basically I started to get a lot of doubts about the Quran because of this. More started with the Jewish myths, then Alexander. Then I'm like, I was talking to my wife, and I actually left Islam for the day. I'm like, I'm so screwed right now. I don't know what to believe. This was in Ramadan. So in Ramadan, you're like bombarded with Islamic content.
Wow.
And that's when actually a lot of ex-Muslims, a lot of Muslims leave Islam in Ramadan, because for most of the year, you kind of like don't really think about Islam too much. But then in Ramadan, it's all like shoved on you like intensely. And then, you know, that's when this debate happened. That's when my doubts were happening. And I skipped fasting for one day.
I was going to ask you if you fasted during that time. Yeah.
Yes, I was fasting every day, but I missed one day because of this. And I think this was 2014. And then what happened was I asked my wife, what should I do? I remember clearly. I went to the mall. I had a coffee. So I enjoyed my missing a fast. And then my wife was like, well, you know, I think, you know, maybe these doubts are not true. Talk to your friends, blah, blah, blah. I talked to my friends. They're like, listen, you're spending too much time on the internet. You need to spend more time with us. Like, come for these study circles and you won't have these problems. And one of them sent me a video of some Egyptian guy that said hollow earth something or other. Like, I'm like, okay, whatever. This doesn't, like, it was enough to appease me. So I'm like, okay, forget it. I'm just going to bury my doubts. I didn't say bury my doubts, but I'm like, I'm more confident Islam is true and less confident about the doubts. I'll just put it aside. Yeah. So I became Muslim again for the entire year until 2015 came. And in 2015, that's when, again in Ramadan, I was at the mosque. I fasted half of Ramadan. Then this imam, his name is Sheikh Dawood Butt. He said, these dumb scientists, they say, you know, this and that, but the Quran says that Allah holds up the sky without any pillars. And the Quran, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he was going on about, he was kind of dissing the scientists, and he was saying the Quran's better. And I'm like, oh my God, all of my doubts came back. I'm like, I'm starting to have problems with this because I was learning that Muhammad wouldn't have known better at the time. So now you have a man that wouldn't know better, that is describing the world with a geocentric worldview, meaning the earth is in the center, the sun is going. The Quran talks about the orbit of the sun and the moon, right? The sun and the moon, it's chasing each other, whatever. Muslims have a way out of this. The get out of jail card is, well, there is an orbit of the sun. the sun is doing an orbit of the Milky Way galaxy, allowing the supermassive black hole in the middle. Come on, the Quran's not talking about that. Come on, like it's obviously talking about like what Muhammad thought. It's going in an orbit around the Earth. That's what it looks like.
I mean, that's from our perception without any, absolutely. Just like from our perception, if we weren't using like geometry in ancient Greece, we might think the Earth was flat without knowing the science. And that's, I get it.
And so I realized that even though the ancient Greek, there were pockets of knowledge and wisdom, not in the backwaters of Arabia where Muhammad was. And I even went, one of my friends who cared about me deeply. He was a doctor. And he took me to, he had a one-on-one paid session with an imam every week. Like he would spend his time to like he was paying this guy, I don't know, $100 every week just to have an hour with him alone. Because this guy was like a popular imam, used to teach in the mosque, but he wanted like one-on-one time. He said, I'm going to give you my one-on-one time with the imam. And this was a Sufi imam. So I was Salafi, so I was against Sufism. I used to see them as like sort of hippie Muslims or whatever. But I said, let me try. I went to meet this imam and I actually asked him, I said, didn't the people at Muhammad's time think the earth was flat? He got mad at me. He's like, how dare you say that they were uneducated and this? And I'm like, okay, buddy, you invited me here to ask for help, to get help, and you're just getting mad at me. Like, okay, this is not going to help me. Like, you gotta debunk my point, not get mad. He got offended. He got so offended. But the fact is, in Arabia at that time, they didn't know better. They thought the earth was flat. The Quran actually talks about like how, we're born out of a clot of blood. It's using 7th century Greek embryology, but like the geocentrism is obvious in the Quran. It's very openly geocentric, very obviously it's geocentric. So I had a problem with this because now I'm starting to see that Muhammad didn't know better. The Quran is using geocentric. So it was a science now. The science was becoming a problem for me. But I buried all this, and now in 2015, it all came back to me, and I'm like, okay, I can't do this. I was there praying at the mosque in Ramadan, and I'm like, my head is hurting. I'm like, I can't do this. What if this is false? What if I'm just believing in a man-made lie? And so I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I have to find out. So I stopped fasting, and I'm like, I'm going to look into this. And I went crazy. I went nuts. I looked up every single thing I could find against Islam or for Islam. The like answering Islam and like answering Islam and like, the rebuttals. And I was watching David Wood videos as well. And I was like watching like Zakir Naik debates, and I was trying to read, blogs on Islam. And the more I read, the more I became convinced. And I found a blog called Rational Islam. And I found another blog called, and basically I summarized all of the information on my blog. But at this time, there wasn't as much resources out there as there is now. Now there's even more content that talks about how Islam is bad. Wiki Islam. Hold on, this is a funny super chat. You want to read it?
Oh my gosh, Apostate Prophet AP. He says Abdullah Sameer does not understand that whenever the Quran says something very unscientific, it is speaking about the unseen, which we cannot understand. Therefore, the Quran is never wrong. Just kidding. Stay away from Islam. Oh, man. Thank you for the super chat, brother. I appreciate it. Oh,
So brother makes a good point. The Quran, but here's actually he makes a very good point, which is an important distinction to make, which some people actually get wrong. So it's worth pointing out. There's 2 types of comments in the Quran, or 2 types of statements. There's falsifiable and unfalsifiable. A lot of ex-Muslims or opponents of Islam will pick on things without realizing they're picking on unfalsifiable points. I'll give you an example. The Quran says that the meteors, the shooting stars, they chase the shayateen, the devils, so that they cannot hear God's like revelations or something, right? It's hilarious. It's such a silly point to say that meteors are chasing devils, but it's unfalsifiable. A better example is the sun setting in a murky pool. A better example is Dhul Qarnayn went to the place of sunrise and sunset. A better example is like even the orbits of the sun and moon. Of course, they try to make it mean something else, but you can argue that the stronger interpretation would be a geocentric interpretation. And so there's more evidence to show that, right? So it's a good point, and it's a good distinction to make, that yes, you can, like, for example, people that are not equipped with Islamic knowledge, they might say things like, ha, Muslims believe in a flying donkey. Like, Muhammad went on a flying donkey to heaven, in the story of and that's what Dawkins said in his debate with Mehdi Hassan. He's like, you believe that Muhammad went on a flying donkey to space? Like, it's kind of it is yes, one of those, like, oh my God, you guys actually believe something so stupid. But like, everything in every religion is like that. Like, Jesus walking on water maybe is an example of that, or like bringing people from dead to life, or like everything in religion is like, all of the myths are that equally stupid. It's not only that one thing. So there's better points you can pick on, that actually where the Quran is talking about physical things that we can observe and we can see this is wrong, right? So
Right.
for example, or things that are like obviously missing from the Quran. For example, the Quran talks about embryology, but it never ever talks about the female egg. How is it that this is coming from God?
They missed it. Yeah,
they missed it. It's completely gone. It's not there. It talks about clot of blood and so when I started to look into each one of these scientific miracles, which to me was confirmation that the Quran was the word of God, because I'm looking, like, as a rational sort of person, I'm looking for some sort of confirmation that my bias, which is that the Quran's the word of God, is true. So to me, that was all of these scientific miracles, that things that no one could have known except Muhammad. When I started to look into them, as they say, the devil's in the details. In this case, the devil's literally in the details, because it all fell apart. Like, everything fell apart. Every single miracle of the Quran, the mountains as pegs, the embryology, they all started to look, they're all debunked online. And even Muslim scholars at this point, when I started looking into this in 2015, had started to admit that this scientific miracle stuff is causing more people to leave Islam, because the new atheists or whatever, they're like poking so many holes in the Quran now, because now they've actually adjusted the method. They avoid saying scientific miracles, but it's even worse than scientific miracles. It's actually scientific flaws. So then they'll say, well, why are you taking it scientifically? Well, it's describing physical phenomena that we can observe, and it's not,
right.
Exactly, right. So it's getting, so now they've gone to, like, the language is miraculous, which also was another argument they've always made, but now they're focusing more on that one rather than saying there's like scientific miracles, because the science is day by day is getting worse and worse and worse.
Abdullah, real quick, I think they mean to say liar instead of lair, but either way, they said give the reference. It doesn't say donkey; it says creature. It says the creature. But something I want to say, it's just interesting. I don't care if it's a grasshopper. That's but what's interesting in what you said there, to give a jab at those who attack Islam but don't actually look at their own religion. Yeah. You've got Elijah flying on a chariot up to heaven, right? So we could do this, and I try to evenly do this. I'm just now starting to pay attention to Islam, and because I know Christianity, I know the Hebrew Bible, I know these two things really well, or well enough to say I know what I'm talking about in them. I don't know enough about the Quran, the Hadith. I don't know enough about them, but I can tell you, just like all religions, I like to take a sword and kind of poke at all of them. So everyone's going to get their chance on MythVision podcast. Just letting you know. All right. So since you're a layer, can you give the reference?
I was very careful with my words. I said, this is what people say, and this is not a good argument. I never said flying donkey myself. I don't even use flying donkey. It's actually burak. It's an animal that's bigger than a donkey but smaller than a horse. It's described as an animal that every step it goes from here to the horizon. So it's like speed of light or something like that. It travels at the speed of light or something. But this person missed the point completely. I'm saying this is not a good this is not a good point to make.
It wasn't a donkey.
It's not a donkey, man. Get it right. It's a burak.
Okay, get the right creature. Goodness gracious.
Get the right mythical creature.
I'm sorry. We're sorry. He didn't specify there on what creature it was that flew Muhammad to the moon, or where did he go? Was it the moon?
He went to, so this is another like thing that actually used to puzzle me as a Muslim, because we are taught, dumb science teaches us that space is a vacuum, and hold on one second. Dumb science teaches us. Sorry, I fixed it. Dumb science teaches us that space is a vacuum, and you can't travel in space. But apparently, Muhammad went in space. Like he traveled to the 7 heavens in Islam.
Enoch did this too, by the way. But go ahead. Yes.
Did he? Okay, I didn't know this.
Yeah.
So like, I didn't understand.
Well, maybe not in those details, but yeah.
I was confused. How does he travel? Like, what is this going on? Is he living in space? Like, I didn't get it. It didn't. The model doesn't fit. The scientific, right. the scientific model doesn't fit the story. So I was always puzzled by this. But now it makes sense to me that they thought that the planets, the 7 planets, like the Saturn, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, whatever, the 7 spheres, Plato's 7 spheres, the moon, they thought they were like actual like Earths or something. And so in that model, yeah, it makes sense. In our model, it's like bizarre. Like he went in the vacuum of space. Like what? Like, and you know what I mean? Like it's quite a problem. So anyway, so yeah, and one of Islam got the idea from Richard Carrier in his debate with Nadir Ahmed pointed this out, that this Plato's 7 spheres. And I'm like, oh, it was like a light bulb going on in my head. Okay, so this is coming. And he made an amazing point, which is that when the Quran doesn't define something, it uses like a term, Sabah Samawat, the 7 heavens, but it doesn't explain what it is. It's assuming that the people of that time are going to know what it means. So we can look at what they meant. And that's when we can understand. But because Muslims today will say 7 heavens means something different. They say 7 heavens, the first heaven is the entire observable universe.
Oh, there's so much more beyond that you just don't know about, like, and there could be.
And I mean, this is like, again, a get out of jail card where you keep reinterpreting things just to make it make sense. Whereas, well, what's a plausible interpretation? The 7 spheres, Plato's 7, it makes perfect sense. It fits the model. There's no, like, he wasn't going in space. He was going from and then even some hadith say there's 7 earths as well, which again is weird. As you go down in the ground, I don't know. I can't even visualize what he meant by that. But anyways, to finish the story, at this point, now I'm like getting more and more confidence that Islam is false and that my doubts are correct. Right? So my faith in Islam is going down and down and down. Then there was a guy who was a friend of mine that I started posting on Facebook openly. I'm an open book. I don't hide these things. I'm just like, look at all these things I'm reading. This is like, people are like, are you doing like a social media experiment? Like, we're worried about you. Like, what are you posting all these things against Islam? A lot of people got mad at me and said, you're causing fitna, which means like dissension and problems. And you shouldn't be posting these things online. You should be going talk to an imam. Why are you posting these things to the public? Right? Because I had like a lot of Muslim friends and they're all reading these things. And I'm like, yeah, but if it's false, then just tell me it's false. And if it's true, then people deserve to know. Right? So that's what I said. So then one guy, he was like, listen, come talk to me. Imams are useless, which he's right. Imams are useless because they don't know these modern problems, because unless they're like a prominent, like scholarly, like famous imam like Yasir Qadi or Hamza Yusuf, these typical imams at the mosque, like living near me, they don't know anything about these doubts in Islam. They don't know anything about, Galenic embryology in the Quran. They never even heard of these things. So
they're just like more religious, just a level above where you were as an actual Muslim, if you will. Like,
but they're not even, they're just like, they do like marriage ceremonies and they do like reading the text tafsir. They don't look into polemics. Right. None of them are taught, even if they went to like Medina, University of Medina, where most Salafi scholars have gone to, you think Medina talks about problems in Islam? Of course not. They just feed them dogma. They have to memorize, like in the school of Hadith, you have to memorize Sahih Bukhari. It's this freaking thick book. You have to memorize it, including all of the, it is narrated that from Abu Huraira, that he heard from Aisha, who said the Prophet said, they're memorizing the entire chains and they're tested. It's just rote memorization. There's no like, they're not going into polemics. So they don't know polemics, right? Even the ones who studied Arabic and they know the original text. And so, yeah, like they basically don't know anything. But this guy, he's like, listen, I went through the same thing as you. Let's talk. And so I deleted all of my posts. I said, I'm excited. I'm going to become Muslim again. I mean, I'm going to be religious. All my doubts are false. I'm going to be a believer. I went to his house. I had a list of questions. At this point in time, it was a list of doubts in Islam. And I'm going to talk about why this framing is important. Usually, when you first start having questions about the religion, they usually you look at it as doubts, because you have faith and certainty almost, and then you have little holes. Eventually, you realize that's the wrong way of looking at it. This is what I realized long after. Really, you should be looking at it neutrally and saying, well, what's the proof in the first place? First proof to me, just because I grew up as a Muslim, most people grew up as Muslims, they just take for granted Islam is true. Well, you should first explain to me why Islam is true, and then we can talk about the doubts. But at this time, it was doubts. So I had a list of like bugs in the software that I wanted to like fix, right? So I went to his house, and he's like, asked him about Muhammad's actions, which, asked him about the scientific stuff. And a lot of the things he just said, listen, I'm taking a leap of faith on this. I don't have an answer for you on this particular question, but like these other things, I can kind of like explain to you something or other. And then I said, okay, but look, what if I have more questions? Do you want me to, can I reach out to you again? He's like, no, listen, I don't want to go through this again. I've accepted I'm not just a Muslim, and I don't want to. Basically, his thing was Pascal's wager. I'm just going to, just in case, I don't want to be on the wrong side. So I'm just going to believe. Even if I have these like issues, I just want to be Muslim now. Like that was his thing, right? So I'm like, that doesn't satisfy me. Like, but I said thank you. And so I started posting again. And then I called, people started, I was kind of like well known because I was a convert to Islam. I was sort of famous, not famous, but like well known in the community. I created Light Upon Light. I was known as, this guy that does a lot of dawah online. Mm-hmm. I helped Yusuf Estes, another famous preacher, to build his website. I was involved on not just Light Upon Light, but Islamic Tube. That was another popular website. I used to help out behind the scenes with the technical stuff because I'm a software developer by profession. And so people wanted to help me. And it brings up another interesting point. How did the Muslim community react? Because sometimes you hear that, which is true, that many Muslims consider that the punishment for leaving Islam is death, which is true.
In specific areas, though, that might actually be something that's true, but I doubt
that is what is taught in Islamic teachings. But The question is that actually, obviously it wouldn't be implemented in Canada, but did people try to threaten me? This is the question. Did people want to kill me? No, not at all. In my particular circumstance, I had people crying, people were sad, people said, come to this conference, we're gonna fix you, read this book. People send me books. I told you my doctor friend, he invited me to his private session with his imam that got mad at me. But anyways, he tried. Yeah. People did try their best, and they were trying to be kind. They were trying to be like helpful, but it didn't work. Like, I had one guy who teaches, he's a PhD in Islam. He's one of my friends from university who actually teaches Islam in the US, in America, in one of the schools. He teaches Islam. And I asked him all of these things. And again, he didn't really have answers for me. I went to another guy. Now, this guy was a little bit slimy. I didn't realize he was planning this like thing against me. And I made a video about it. But he basically invited me as he was like the imam at the mosque, but he was also my friend from before. And he was like asking me like pointed questions that he wanted to use against me later. So he was saying, did you ever feel khushu, which means like serenity when you were praying? Did you ever have a hard time fasting? He was asking me questions that were like, he wanted to basically not like slander me with. And I didn't know this. And I'm like, yeah, I don't like fasting. I'm like, I don't like fasting, man. I always found fasting was tough for me. I always found it to be a burden, but it's not meant to be easy. That's the thing. I don't like, how is this a point against me? If it was easy, then what's the point of it?
They believe that like demons and stuff, like some Christians will say, oh, there's possession taking place. This is the reason. Like, have you had that accusation?
You know what's funny?
Yeah.
Abdullah ibn Iblis means Abdullah, the son of Satan.
No.
Son of the devil.
Well, thank you, Satan, or son of Satan, for super chatting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, they do believe in devils, and like some people thought I was possessed. I think my circle of friends were less on the possessed side. I mean, less on the you are possessed sort of thinking. Some of them did think I was possessed, but I think more of it, they just thought I was just like misguided.
Right.
confused and whatever. Of course, some people, I've heard of other ex-Muslims tell me that one other ex-Muslim I know, his parents, actually two of them, made them go for like exorcisms, where the imam was like reading Quran in the face and like saying get out devil, and they said it was actually quite personally invasive, and it was very uncomfortable what they had to go through. So yeah, some Muslims do believe in devil. All Muslims believe in devils pretty much, but like some of them take it to the next level with exorcism. Some people don't believe in exorcisms.
Pentecostal Muslims is what I like to call. Interesting. Okay.
The Quran says you can be like the other devils. You have to believe in invisible creatures called jinns and devils, but whether they can possess or not, that's like a difference of opinion among like Muslims.
So you have these doubts, obviously, that come up mainly from a scientific approach. And then you start to go, okay, the text, science, there's a problem here. Once the light bulb went off, you now left. People try to change you to come back. You're not coming back.
I might have. I was hoping to come back.
Well, I'm saying you're not convinced. At this point, you're like, okay, the door opens up. And I can only say from my own experience, maybe you could tell me, yes, that's what happened to me, or no. Once the door started to open and you felt less fear about it, you started to go, hold on, I know something that they're not aware of and they're not seeing it.
Yes.
There's more. Now I need to find out what else is out there. So now you're really looking at the prophet, someone that you had to literally, every time you said his name, how does the phrase go? Like after you say,
Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, peace and blessings be upon him. Yeah.
Yeah. Every time, peace be upon him. And I'm like, I've heard people like say Muhammad 2-3 times in one sentence, peace be upon him. Peace. And I'm like, what the heck is this? I have a hard time understanding that, but that's a cultural thing in the whole religion. Now you're able to look at him. You're able to look at things you were thinking, I can never touch the prophet. You know, I can never do this.
Exactly.
What are some what are some revelations that you've discovered that I think would be like, oh snap? And we got a question here.
You want to answer the question first, and then
I always take tithes, especially. You know, got to have the 12.5% for my Smileys out there. You know what I'm saying?
Does followers? You mean?
Yeah. Does Abdullah see as the sectarian violence by religions and ideologies against religious minorities and dissonance reform or loss of all faith?
I don't totally understand. So maybe if there's a clarification, you can clarify what he means.
Yeah, clarify the question a little better if you don't mind, William.
If he's saying like, do I support? Okay, if he's saying this is a very popular question, do I support reform in Islam versus just leaving Islam? That's a very common question because some people believe you can't reform Islam. Some people believe that, you know, the only way to the only good Muslim is an ex-Muslim, which again, I find that supremely stupid. But anyways, yeah, I do support reform. I don't think Islam, to be honest, I know a lot of people think Islam is uniquely bad and it can't be reformed. Mm-hmm. If you've been listening to the last hour of us talking, you'll see that I don't believe Islam is any different than any other religion in the sense that it's a man-made ideology that is at best guess effort at trying to figure out what God wants from us. So I don't think it's any different. I do think it can be reformed. And I do see Islam being reformed. So if you check out my blog, I have an article exactly on that. Islam is being reformed day by day, in my opinion. Yes, it's taking a lot longer, but it is a younger religion compared to Christianity and Judaism. Judaism's been along longer.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm with you 100% on that. I think the same thing for Christianity. I don't expect Christianity to disappear overnight, and I don't expect it to end or go away. I would like to see people become more liberal in their approach if they want to believe in these things and reform with culture at large as we evolve in the direction we're heading. The staunch fundamentalist, literalist approach of things are harmful. I also combat the ideas that, no, what it really meant was this spiritual esoteric thing. Don't get me wrong. That's fine. If you want to believe there's secret hiding messages behind these texts that you think were really the initial intention, if that's what makes you, wake up and have a great day and drink your cup of coffee and love life, I am absolutely not trying to destroy that for you. At the same time, I'm trying to understand what it actually meant when it meant what it meant. And do we really need these texts to live our life today? So I would prefer that people found happiness and joy and love and life outside of these religions, though I would be happy to see the religions themselves reform if they're going to continue to coexist with humanity in this world we live in. So Yeah, and then thank you
Well
for
said.
the
Well
super
said.
chat. Yeah, thank you, man. I just, I guess sometimes I got to drop a little bomb on them. You know what I'm saying? MythVision got the most interesting channel at the moment on YouTube, Myths, Religions, History. Sixter, thank you for the super chat, my friend. Trying to keep it interesting, but there's so much to talk about in the vein of these religions and these cults. Don't forget my question with you about Muhammad, and let's probe into that real quick. Arjun, my friend Arjun, thank you for the super chat. There are quite some theological differences between the Abrahamic religions, but there are also many painful similarities. That's true.
Well said. Honestly, there are very many painful similarities. I love that.
It's true, and that's one of the things.
So, now, sorry, what was your question again?
So real quick, William did answer. You did answer it. So I think we all both touched on it. The question was, now that you've said, okay, let's just use this.
Oh, yeah. Open up the floodgates.
I can test this book. I've got a lot of problems scientifically. I've got a lot of problems with this and that. But now I'm able to touch the prophet, which that was sacrilegious. You cannot touch the prophet. What are some things that you started to actually realize, oh my God, this guy's not a good person, according to the standards we live in today? And I don't know, because I've heard arguments from scholars. You'll know what I'm talking about when I say this. Oh, the criteria of embarrassment doesn't apply then, because in that time, that wasn't embarrassing to marry a 9-year-old, or that wasn't embarrassing to have 14.
It wasn't wrong back then.
Right,
It's So about that specifically, that's kind of like that's a mistake for them to say that, because they're also claiming Muhammad is the best man for all times. So you can't just say it was okay back then. It has to be okay even now. Or even worse, you're saying it's still okay today because he did it, which is one of the biggest problems with Muhammad's behavior. Is unfortunately, many Muslims will take his behavior as, because the Quran says he's the ultimate example. And so whatever he did back then must be okay. So there's actual countries blocking marriage reform laws because of Muhammad marrying a 6-year-old and consummating at 9. If that was true or not, that's a different story altogether. But they're taking it as true, right? They're taking that as fact. Once the floodgates were open, like they said, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's very difficult, which is why I was confused by this guy that had all these doubts and just came back to Islam, which is weird, right? But the thing is, I've already proven myself once that I was able to leave Ismailism. So like I have that personality that I'm not attached. I don't get stuck just because I'm heavily vested into a position. I made a mistake, and now I have to undo that mistake. Yes, it's going to cost me all of my friends. So what are the consequences of me leaving Islam? Because I was in that, like you said, in like I said, I was almost like in a cult. And my friends are like, I'm not helping you move. My wife's friends are like, leave him. Like, that's like extreme, right? That's the type of group I was in. They didn't buy houses. Like, that's the group I was in, like ultra religious. All my friends were friends based on faith. So now what happened? I lost all my friends, most of them. I basically kept like 2 friends, Muslim friends, 1 or 2. My wife similarly. Like it's basically starting from scratch again, because all of those social contacts and social things, it's all gone, right? So there was a heavy price, but I was going to pay that price because I don't care. At the end of the day, that's just my personality. Like, I want people to know. The mistake I made was I thought that just because it's obvious to me that this is wrong, I just assume when I post on Facebook, everybody would be like, yep, that's true. And they're all going to leave Islam, or at least many of them would, but they didn't. I didn't realize like what a strong grip, childhood indoctrination has on people, or can have, to the point that even if it's in your face, obvious mistake, they just find a way to excuse it, and they come up with a way of saying, oh no, it's not a mistake. He didn't actually see the sun set in a murky pool. It was just the way it looked. It wasn't actually going into a pool, a pond or whatever. So they find ways to kind of stay on the faith. And there's an interesting similarity in the story of Malcolm X. Malcolm X, when he found out that Elijah Muhammad had all of these like he had made all of these teenage women pregnant, and he wasn't even taking care of the kids or anything. That was like a shock to him, because he saw Elijah Muhammad as this man of God that saw Allah, spoke to God or whatever, and yet now he's seeing like bad behavior from him, something that he himself, Elijah Muhammad, preaches against. Everyone has to get married and blah blah blah, but he was doing something different. And so now he had this major cognitive dissonance, but he didn't tell anyone. But this was one of the major things that caused him to lose his faith in the Nation of Islam. Eventually, he decided to come publicly about it. He openly told people Elijah Muhammad has these, like, he's done this bad thing. Guess what happened? What he thought was this was going to be like a bombshell. People will immediately, leave Elijah Muhammad. But what happened was people started making excuses for the guy, saying, but he's still a good guy. Everyone can make mistakes. I don't believe you. You're a liar. And then eventually he was assassinated, obviously, by the Nation of Islam because of this step he took. He took this very public, dangerous step of like attacking the leader of this movement that had a military, component to it. So they killed him for it. But the point is, people are not that easy to convince. We are not rational creatures overall. We are more on the side of like emotions and, being part of the religious community. And this guy is like a father figure to them. So people, even if you tell them your father did this bad thing, they'll have a hard time accepting it, even when you show them the evidence. When people, like moms whose kids are psychopaths, they refuse to believe this guy just killed like 100 people. They will not believe it. I can't believe this is my kid. No way. Like, look, here's a video of him doing it. No, I can't. Like, we humans are so weird. We've evolved such strange abilities to have cognitive dissonance, and for whatever reason, it was beneficial to us in our ancestral history. But it doesn't lead to truth always. That's the problem. Our truth systems are broken,
That's a really well said statement. Honestly, I agree with you. We're mostly emotional, and that's why if you really watch some of these people who just use pathos, if you will, to convince people, they use the emotional route. That's the best way to get people. And it's almost like, how do we get people who are in it to come out if they think you're just a robot without feelings and you're just this guy who's just all this information? You kind of hear this quote in the New Testament where one of the kings, I can't remember his name, maybe it was Herod or something, Herod Agrippa or something. He says, Paul, you're driven mad with learning. Like, you're just mad. You're just crazy. There's no real passion there. I wonder if you take emotional approach and you show with an emotion, if that will help more people to see it. But it's tough.
One of those things. It's one of those things you have to. So my approach is you let people decide for themselves. Like, how they say you can take a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. It's at the end of the day, all you can do is to, be that kind person to try to help someone, but you can't force anyone to do anything. So let them, be gentle, be kind. Don't start with Muhammad's a pedophile, because that's not going to go well. That's kind of like, if you're going to just bash them on the head with Islam, then, you're not going to convince anyone like that. You have to have empathy,
If I may, let's poke here for a second on Muhammad. I want to ask you this, because I don't know. Are there people early on in the movement overall that are already defecting, trying to whistleblow the problem with this thing? And did those people catch red flags? Because you couldn't pay, like, can you imagine finding out early apostates of Christianity, right? Christians will be like, no, those are apostates. Why? Because Origen said so, and Justin Martyr said so, and Irenaeus said so, and Athanasius, and you name these church fathers, and you're just going to side with the church fathers because you're already a Christian. But let's say you found problems with Christianity, and now you're going, did this guy have a point? Why did he defect from the movement? Was he maybe onto something about this thing? Are there any defectors, apostates, that really, now that you've opened the floodgates, you're able to inspect them and say, that guy might be onto something? He had negative things to say about the movement. Is there anything like that in Islam?
Yeah. So, the stories are far and few in between, because you have to remember that everything we know about Muhammad, 99% of it comes from Islamic sources, the Sunni Hadith corpus, the Shia Hadith corpus, the Quran itself. And to really, like, a lot of the things we complain about Muhammad doing, they were recorded and preserved because they didn't have an issue with it back then. They didn't see it as a problem per se, for example, right? But like, there is an example of Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, who was an early scribe of Muhammad. He said that Muhammad would narrate the Quran to him and he would write it. And for example, there was one time where this is in the Sunni hadith, by the way, or the seerah, the life of the Prophet. He told, Muhammad told him, right, at the end of many of the verses of the Quran, it ends with Allah Aziz Al Hakim, like two of Allah's names, the mighty, the wise, and Allah is all forgiving, most merciful, and Allah is seer over all that they do. It ends with one of the names or multiple names of Allah, right? So there was an example where Muhammad said, and narrate the whatever it was, like the most wise, the most merciful, and this guy Abdullah was like, no, maybe it should be like the most mighty, the most great, or something, right? Like a different name, right? And Mom was like, yeah, okay, just write that one instead. The guy was like, what? I thought this is coming from God. How is it that I'm like adjusting the Quran here? Like something like that. That's the story, right? So because of that, he apostated. He left Islam and he ran away. But the thing is, I believe in this example, he actually ended up coming back to Islam. The thing is, this is why you have apostasy law. Muhammad, just like any other dictator, did not allow anyone to speak against him. This is why Islam is so terribly bad. There's examples in the hadith of him assassinating Ka'b ibn Ashraf. Ka'b was a half Jewish, half Arab, beautiful young poet that would write poetry against Muhammad. So Muhammad said, who wants to get rid of this? Just like the Nation of Islam leader said, who wants to get rid of Malcolm? He said, who wants to get rid of this enemy of Allah for me? And these two guys put up their hands and said, we'll do it. And he said, great, Allah is on your side. And then they said, can we lie to him? And he said, yeah, you can lie to him. So they went to his place, and they used to be friends of his. Then this is this nasty thing about the story. And they said, hey, Ka'b, come down. And it was late at night. The story, again, some of this may be embellished by the Muslim authors, but it was late at night. And he said, come down. They said, come down, Ka'b. We want to smell you. You just got married. We want to smell your perfume, your beautiful perfume, right? And his wife was like, don't do it. I smell something bad, right? And he's like, no, these are my friends, right? And they're like, so he came down and they killed him, right? So, and then they went back and Muhammad praised them. There's other examples like this where a man said, so if you want to know more examples, we have a stream on my channel with me and my co-partner on the channel, Abdullah Gondal, where we talked about blasphemy law, where we give tons of examples like this. But just one more example. There was a man, it says in the hadith that his slave girl was insulting Muhammad, so he killed her. And he told Muhammad, and Muhammad said there's no blood money to be paid because there's no blood money to be paid. And he said you did a good thing, or he basically didn't punish the man for killing his slave. So normally, if you kill your slave, there'd be a punishment because it's less of a punishment because it's a slave. It's even less if it's a slave woman. But in this case, there's no punishment because she was insulting the Prophet. So he was like tacitly encouraging and even going out and assassinating people that if you leave Islam, you will be executed. You are not allowed to leave Islam. Muslims will say that's because at the time, Islam was not just an identity, but it was also part of the state religion. And so it was treason to leave Islam is treason. This law is actually about treason, not about Muhammad. That's just nonsense in my opinion. It's not about treason. It's always about Muhammad and obeying Muhammad and criticizing Muhammad. And so that at the end of the day, that's all it was. It was, if there was any sort of dissent, it was cut off, right? Like Muhammad wouldn't allow it. And that's why you have apostasy law.
Wow. I want everybody watching, if you're not already a subscriber, he has 2 channels on YouTube. You can go subscribe to both of them, but
just this one, because I mainly upload on this one.
That's what I was going to say. Like, you have videos though that are still up on the other one. But the thing I want everyone to know, and why I think it's really important you subscribe to this channel, you're not only helping Abdullah to potentially grow this to a point where you can do this full time because your other channel was shut down. Like, I know the importance of monetization on YouTube and getting this out for more people. This is the channel that's actually monetized. The other channel was demonetized. So please come and subscribe to this channel specifically. It is in the description of this video, but you can look up his name on YouTube. There's so much good material here to look into and really critically analyze the faith of the Muslim faith, if you will. Lots of material. Go subscribe to this channel. You're going to help him grow it, not only, and help him to keep exposing these ideas to the world, because you're not allowed to. You're not supposed to. And, it's like everybody knows when mama says don't eat that cookie, who doesn't want to eat that cookie? I mean, you know what I'm saying? So come eat the cookie is what I'm saying.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a bit of an uphill battle with YouTube, getting completely demonetized, which basically cripples your channel, because you get second tier view status. YouTube doesn't want to even promote the videos that don't make them money. And now, of course, they've changed the rules again. But it's okay. Like I took that that loss in stride, and now I'm studying from scratch on the Friendly Ex-Muslim channel. It's new branding, new me, and thank you so much for plugging that. I appreciate it.
Look, I want to do more with you. I can tell that you and me, not only I got a good vibe and the connection was great. You know a lot about this. I want to do more. I want to have experts in the field who are critical of the Quran, the Hadith, that have read these things, that know. And so maybe you can help steer me in that direction, get me some books and potential scholars to talk about the subject, because one of my keen interests personally is comparative mythology and literary or possible literary connections, meaning like you talked about earlier. I want to see where in the Hadith or in the Quran you see borrowing happening from the rabbis, that from these books, these apocryphal texts. And I want to really be able to show it and probe it with a scholar who can give us some visuals, because what that does is explodes the entire inerrancy of the Muslim and the Quran, the perfect God's word idea, that it just destroys that whole thing when you find out, oh, well, they just used this text and they just used that text to compile and create what we have as a Quran. Thank you, intermediary fossil. You know what I mean? And John, thank you so much. A fascinating guest. Mahalo. I appreciate you, man. Seriously. I can't say it enough. Go subscribe.
I was going to say a good resource, obviously, other than my blog, is Wiki Islam. Most Muslims don't like it. They try to say it's unacademic, blah, blah, blah. But Wiki Islam is actually very well cited. They have a team of, it's done by the ex-Muslims of North America, wikiislam.net, and they have like everything you can imagine on there, from misogyny in the Quran, Ramadan, downsides of Ramadan, Muhammad's actions. It's a good resource. They put a lot of money and effort into building it. It's called Wiki Islam. There's a bit of a challenge with finding Muslim scholars who speak against Islam, because they're disincentivized to speak about it. So, for example, let's say, Yasir Qadhi, a famous scholar that has actually said a lot of things that got him into trouble recently. He said there's well-known holes in the Quranic preservation. Like, he said there's holes in the Quranic preservation narrative. And he said the scholars, the academics know this. So when you get into academia, it becomes a bit of you're an Islamophobe if you say anything against Islam. So even the real academics on Islam are scared to say anything negative about Islam. They always have to like couch it in like, I'm neutral. There's one scholar of Arabic that has studied the Quranic preservation, and I've asked him to come on my channel, and he politely declined because he doesn't want to be associated with my channel, because he doesn't want to be attacked and kicked out of academia.
Wow.
Like, you can be like completely canceled if you go on some ex-Muslim channel, right? Potentially. So I actually support him on Patreon. And for example, like Yasir Qadhi, he's in academia. He's at Yale, and I forget if he's at Yale now or if he's at someone else, but he was at Yale. He did his PhD. He knows the problems with Islam. He knows all of them. And he said this openly in some of his clips, that when you go into academia, they take apart Islam and you don't know how to put it back together anymore, because you're exposed to a lot of things that you never, like I said, when he went to Medina, they're not telling him about the problems. They're just telling him the official narrative. But when he goes to Yale, well, now they're like real academics, and they're like picking it apart. Well, this thing doesn't fit with this and this. And then I was like, oh, now. And other scholars like Noman Ali Khan, preachers, have also said the same thing, that he knows people that went to Harvard studied Islam there, and they left Islam. They can't maintain the Islam. I've noticed something about Muslims in academia is they tend to be like wishy-washy Muslims. They're like Muslim, but they're not like me. They're not like, and a lot of the times I kind of clash with people like this because they're like, you're misrepresenting Islam. You're saying Islam, Muhammad married a 9-year-old. I'm like, I'm just going by what the hadith says, and I'm showing people this is bad according to what they believe. I don't care whether it actually happened or not. They think it's real. So we base our discussions on that common ground. Whereas like some of the academics I know and some of the academics I even respect will say this is ahistoric that Muhammad married a 9-year-old. I'm like, okay, but if you don't know that, then you don't know anything about Muhammad.
Right. So this is what we were talking about before we hit record that you were going to touch on. So before we go, because we got, you know, I don't want to go too much longer with you. I want to do more with you. Sure. And I don't want to burn my bridge with you in terms of, when I come on there, we go on forever because I have fun.
It's okay. It's good. Yeah.
As long as you're having fun, I'm okay. I want to respect.
We can do another 10, 15 minutes. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So final thing is the hadith and did it happen or didn't happen? And so this is the point. It's like cherry picking what happened when it looks good in the current context of the world we live in, especially in the West, or, that happened because nothing bad, nothing bad's there. We'll let that historically be true. But if he married a 9-year-old, that doesn't look good. I tell this all the time. If you look at the Hebrew Bible, slavery is not just like any typical thing. There's legitimate chattel slavery. You own human beings in the ancient world. In the ancient Near East, that's just the way it was. But the Bible's no different, and it condones it. God is even, according to the prophets and the laws and whatnot, is still like working in the same vein. You could do the same thing with genocide. God tells Israelites to go kill all the Amalekites or whoever it might be, every man, woman, and child. King Saul doesn't do all of it. He keeps one of the kings alive, and he has their animals still alive. And Samuel's like, what the heck? I hear cattle. What's all this noise? He has to make an excuse. So long story short, there's bad and ugly in antiquity we wouldn't apply today.
Yeah.
Tell us, did it happen? Didn't happen? Yeah.
So you made another point, which I want to mention before we get into that other one, which is that there's an interesting distinction that we have here between Islam and Christianity in that a lot of the terrible things in the old Hebrew Bible, they're not considered that you need to follow those. No one says, oh, God. It is a problem because God allowed such a terrible thing to happen, keeping the virgins alive or whatever. And that's like, what was God on? Like, he changed his mind now or something? But with Islam, you have a important distinction, which is that what Muhammad did, many Muslims think you should still do this today, right? You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. With the Bible, okay, a lot of these things God, Jesus came and whatever. We don't do any of these things anymore. It's still problematic why God allowed in the first place in that even in that specific time. Why did He allow slavery? But like with Islam, it's actually worse because many Muslims believe you can still do slavery today. I remember in university having a debate about this. Some Muslims will say slavery is canceled now. Because Muhammad and what the scholars will do is they'll say something called, what's the term they use? They'll basically say that Muhammad intended to eliminate it, which is why he put restrictions on it, right? Whereas, well, that's not really a good argument because he eliminated interest in one go, right? So to me, it's not a good argument. But they will say trajectory hermeneutics. They'll say trajectory hermeneutics. Muhammad put restrictions on where you could apply, where you could acquire slaves. You have to treat them well. The Quran says you should free slaves. You'll always hear Muslims saying the Quran says you have to free slaves. Well, yes, but there's still problematic, right? So anyways, the point is some Muslims will say, well, slavery, and these tend to be the Islamists or the jihadists, well, slavery was never explicitly forbidden by Muhammad. So to this day, ISIS will take slaves because where does it say that you're not allowed to have slaves? It doesn't say that. So if you want to just go by that, slavery is still allowed to this day. You see what I mean about the difference between Christianity and Islam here?
Yeah, I mean, but you could even say, like, if you get into the New Testament, there are literal, like, commands where he says, slaves, obey your masters. And this is New Testament. So guys like David Wood and others that are friends of maybe you and other ex-Muslims, because he's big into the vein,
Yeah.
I personally do the same thing that you guys do to Islam, to not only the New Testament in Christianity. Is it better in the New Testament than the Old? Of course. Of course. By the first century, I would say, yes, things they're not, first of all, infant sacrifice and stuff like that. You can see fossils of this in the Hebrew Bible.
Wow.
Jephthah's daughter was a burnt sacrifice. So there's a lot of stuff. Like there's a human sacrifice that actually happens in the Hebrew Bible in Judges chapter 11, verse 30 to 40. He's going to battle this other people, and he says, God, deliver them to me. Sure enough, he says, he says, the first person who walks through the door of my house, pretty much, he's saying, comes into my house, I will make them a burnt sacrifice to you. Now, the funny thing about, it's not funny, but I'm saying, like, let me not use the word funny, because you can't even say funny and someone will take me wrong. That's not my point. The point is, as soon as he makes this vow to Yahweh that he will make a burnt sacrifice of any of these human, whoever it is that walks through the door, as long as he delivers the enemy into his hands, they go to war. He takes over 20 cities or something like that. He conquers. He comes back, and his daughter was the first person to walk through. And he goes, you have undone me. He yells to his daughter, like, what are you doing? And then he says, God, I made this vow to you. Not one moment in all of that did God go, hey, look, I'm not taking human sacrifice today. Okay. I don't do that stuff. Wow. But they'll run to the Abraham story real quick to go, well, in Abraham's case, he was going to sacrifice him, and God stopped him. And then he said, no, here's an animal. But in Jephthah's case, it literally says in Judges 11 that he's telling his daughter that he made this vow, and his daughter turned and said to him, do unto me that you vow to the Lord. Just allow me 2 months to go out into the hills and pretty much show, like mourn about my virginity, because she never had a virginity taken. He says, okay, you can do that. And then when she comes back, he does the sacrifice. He burns his daughter as a sacrifice to Yahweh. Now that's ugly. But then again, so is the picture of a man dying for the sins of people being sacrificed. It's just, there's a lot here. There's a lot here. So
that's quite wild. I actually just made a video on, kind of a side note. I made a video on Abraham talking about how his sacrifice was such a cruel sacrifice. I actually the first title of the video was Abraham the Monster. Then I actually readjusted it. I said, okay, let me not call him a monster. Let me say sacrifice was cruel. I wasn't sure. The funny thing is when I talk about things like that,
it's not funny. Remember, you can't even say funny.
I get a lot less views because a lot of my audience is Christians. Right. Christians that don't like Islam. So when I'm actually saying something about something that's common, then people are less happy that I'm actually going after their religion too, because I would say that what Abraham did is like even worse because God commanded him to do that. You know what I'm saying? Like what I mean is it's horrible what this guy did, which would have actually added a little bit of that would have been useful for me to point out. Muslims don't know that story. We don't have that story. That's not part of the Islamic story. But the same idea of Abraham willingly murdering his own child, like how is that a good thing? Why would God command that? And then it's like, at the end he did take away the child, but the point is he's praised for doing it anyways, as if it's almost like a gang. Like I said in the video, it's almost like a gang initiation ritual. You have to do something like shoot someone or kill someone to get into the gang, and that's kind of like, isn't that what all of these, like that's what the religion is teaching, blind obedience? And wow, that's nuts. So the Bible's actually worse than the Quran then. If it has a story like that. Quran doesn't even have like child sacrifice.
I wish I could zoom in on this to show you. I don't know. Can you see these words?
No, try Control Plus.
Control Plus. I have a Mac.
Oh.
Let's see. Yeah, I've got an Apple. Man, how do you zoom in?
Slide with the mouse wheel maybe and hold Control.
Control.
And the mount two button. I don't know how to use Macs.
Yeah, that's the problem. Well, I'll just highlight it with blue to do my best, right? And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord: if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Then Jephthah went out to fight the Ammonites. The Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aroer to vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel Keramim. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, Who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter, you have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break. My father," let me highlight the rest. "My father," she replied, "have you given your word to the Lord? Do to me just as you promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said, and he let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin. From this comes the Israelite tradition that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite. I think I'm saying that correct. But yeah,
Wow.
that is, and here's the thing, you're right. In Abraham's situation, it's clear God is like actively in the conversation, right? So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
and then he goes, just kidding. I know that you're really devout. That was the point. I just wanted to see if you would do it. But now that I know you would, even though I know all things, wink, wink, I'm testing you, and here he pulls a plug. Okay. And it's pretty compared to, and if he actually did it, at least he didn't do it in the narrative. A lot of scholars say this is actually a polemic trying to say, or some type of thing trying to say, we're not doing human sacrifice anymore.
Yeah.
Okay? It is, but in the other story, in Judges 11, the reason I say it's ugly is that God never comes in and says, "Look, I'm not taking human sacrifice.
Yeah.
I'm not." He should have said, "That's not okay," because that's what they'll do. They'll run right to Abraham and see God's not okay with that. He put a ram or a lamb or a goat, or he gives a different animal, not a human. In Judges 11.
Isn't it weird that if this is a lesson, you imagine teaching your kids like this, getting them to do something horrible, stopping them at the last second, and then praising them for doing it? And like, what kind of teacher would that be, or what kind of parent would that be? Like telling your kids go and murder someone, and then at the last minute you kind of like stop them and say, "Well done." Like, is that how God was supposed to be the ultimate teacher? That's how he's teaching us. Like, it's actually a good thing to like kill your own son. If I tell you to, it's a good thing to do that. Like, it's crazy, right? It's just nuts.
I think once again, we're dealing with antiquity. So it's obviously like giving your firstborn is a sign of how, like, the most important thing you have is the firstborn, right? So this is the most prized and valuable possession to give to the Lord. I don't at all think the author is thinking in the 21st century, there's going to be a woman in Texas who's going to think God is speaking to her. So she's going to drown her 4 infants and say God told her to do it.
That's awful.
That's not the mindset the authors have in the ancient world. But the mindset of the ancient world is not what we should have today. And that's what I'm trying to do, is educate people to say, leave that where that belongs. Yeah. And, focus on today. Let's move on a little, anyway.
And about your question about the hadith, the point is that we have a common ground. I have a common ground with someone to discuss if they consider the hadith to be, let's say, historic, even though it's not, but let's say they consider it historic, so to speak, for the most part. Not every single hadith, but as a whole, the hadith corpus. Because if they don't, then they don't know anything about Muhammad. So then, okay, well, I'm done. I don't need to discuss with you anything, because you're not Muslim anymore, or you're like a sort of Quranist Muslim that believes whatever you want to believe about Muhammad. But if you're a Sunni Muslim, then we have a common ground, which is a hadith. Now, if I believe that it's possible, maybe Aisha was not 9 when the marriage was consummated. Maybe she was 12 or 13 or 18 or whatever. That's beside the point, because the reality is that you accept it, so that we can discuss based on that. Now, if you want to go to the next level, that maybe hadith are not true, I would appreciate that, because I do think that it gets more complicated in reality. And that's when you look at actual scholars, like, for example, Sean Anthony, he has a book on trying to discover the historic Muhammad. It gets very, very dense and very complicated, because it's beyond my pay grade to talk historic Muhammad. Because we don't know. Historic Muhammad is like, you have to really look at like you have to look at tertiary sources, like letters, that was written about Muhammad, and you have to look at what people. It just gets way more difficult, and to most Muslims, it's besides the point, right? Because they're already believing in it as it's like literally true. So we
Right.
discuss on that basis. That's I think the easy answer to that.
So I know this is a tough one, because if you were to say, for example, did Jesus exist? Do you believe Jesus existed? Right? I couldn't give you an easy answer, and I couldn't say, oh, absolutely, or yes. It's a complex question because the Gospels are highly mythologized. We don't know what he actually said. If there was a guy, I'm not even certain there was a guy. I lean to think that there could have been a guy at the basis of this whole thing, and that this intense legend builds up around him. The other plausibility is someone like Dr. Richard Carrier that you know about, and he thinks the legend is what started and it became historical. Either way, it's complex. But in your personal studies, this is just your personal opinion. Do you lean that there was a historical Muhammad at the basis? Do you think that it's possible that there wasn't? Where do you lean on that before we let you?
Yeah. So very much, there's a lot of evidence that there was a man whose name was Muhammad that united the tribes of Arabia and conquered and did all these things. That if anyone is interested, they should look at real scholars like Sean Anthony and his book. Islamic Awareness, which is a pro-Islam website, has an article called Earliest References to Muhammad, where they have references from like coins and different things that actually point to the fact that there was a man that did this. Now, again, the details about him, like from his day-to-day life in the hadith are very questionable on the whole. We don't know for sure, like a lot of the things, like how accurate they are. But yes, for sure there was a Muhammad, I believe. And again, this is something that I don't tend to get into. There is like a theory about it's actually popularized by Dan Gibson, where he says that Muhammad was actually not in Arabia, but in Petra, Jordan. And this is actually like a common revisionist theory, a popular revisionist theory among many, many people. Always ask me, what do you think about, is Mecca actually in Jordan? Right? Because there's a lot of evidence that the old mosques were all pointing towards that direction. And, like, for example, some of the descriptions in the Quran, they seem to match like the foliage and stuff. And even like the Quran talks about the people that Ad and Thamud that built like houses in the mountains. You see a lot of that in Nabatean, when you go to the Nabatean part of Jordan, you see these like carvings in the mountains and stuff, right? So there's a lot of like evidence or indications that maybe this is true, but like actual historians like Sean Anthony have said that there's it's very that position is not strong and it's not defensible. So I'm just going to go with what Sean Anthony says here. I haven't looked into it myself, and honestly, it's way too complicated. And the amount of time I would need to spend to actually figure this out, I think it's not worth it at this point. I'm kind of at the point where I want to keep talking about this, but I don't want to. I like other things in my life now other than just Islam. I want to learn about, I like reading. Like one of my favorite books is Everything is Fucked by Mark Manson. Like when we're talking, when we're talking about the emotional side versus the rational side, he is an outstanding author. This is one of my favorite books of all time. He writes, so it's so easy to read. It's funny, and he makes these like really deep points.
Wow.
While like making it like easy and enjoyable to consume. So like he's Mark Manson is someone saying on your channel, and exactly his books are the bomb. They're the best. So I want to read stuff like that. I want to read about, like, I'm reading Dawkins' books, like The Blind Watchmaker. I don't want to spend too much time digging into things that, like, I have enough knowledge on Islam as a formal practicing Muslim, I think, to speak about it confidently and point out the flaws without being a real academic. I think if I wanted to get into academia, it wouldn't add much value because Muslims will never accept me, even if I had a PhD. At the end of the day, they'll always come up with some excuse, right? Like,
that's a great point. Just wanted to nail that down. You can become an expert. You can know everything there is to know about it. Because you're not a Muslim, there's automatically you're out. And even if you were a Muslim, let's say you're a practicing Muslim who's having doubts, it's all about keeping you within that bubble. So as you were leaving, you were pointing out evidences. None of them were like, you know what, this is a great point. I think I'm gonna go with the logic here. No, it's all about, but that's the mindset that cults actually develop. And I see this over and over, whether it's Scientology, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventist, different versions of Christianity that I've been in communication with. And then there's other cults. You start getting out into weird stuff that are out there. But yeah, this is no different.
Yeah. So, so basically, I think for what I'm trying to do, there's the biggest bang for the buck in sort of leaning on that. And again, when it comes to academics, I think a lot of them are scared to speak against Islam. I think people like Yasir Qadhi, if they actually left Islam, but they built their entire lives around it, would they ever come out? I don't know if they would. I think, first of all, they'd get death threats. They'd lose everything they have in their life. The respect from the community, the speaking engagement gigs. Like Yasir Qadhi does Umrah and Hajj tours. So he's a guide when you go for Hajj, right? For the pilgrimage, and he makes a lot of money off that too. There's just no incentive for people to speak openly against Islam as an academic. It's just people that, like me, that are not, like, my livelihood is not tied to this. I can speak about it. Although I have had threats against my livelihood as well, in terms of like people called up my office and tried to get me fired, saying I'm an Islamophobe or whatever. But I have the skills that I can work around that. I can always get a new job. I can deal with my boss. My boss actually just ignored those people and said, well, that's what he does in his own personal time. It has nothing to do with his like coding or whatever. So I was okay. But like, it does affect me. It hurts me too, being canceled for doing this. But I think people in academia, it's even worse. So there's just not like, and academia tends to be more liberal and stuff. So it's even more difficult to be like critical on Islam. One of my good friends, Ali Rizvi, he's written a book on Islam, and it's called Atheist Muslim. He was invited to speak at a university. I forget, it was University of Toronto or one of those universities. Anyways, and when he came, they got so much backlash from the Muslims that they agreed to have a Muslim academic like counter him after, which is kind of funny. Like, so he agreed. He's like, okay, that's fine. I don't care, whatever. So he did his little spiel, and then this academic. But the academic was so funny. He was one of these like wishy-washy Muslims that Muslims can drink alcohol, Islam allows everything. Like, he was like, that's the type of Muslims in academia. They're not like orthodox at all. They don't tend to be, because you can't. How do you maintain your dogma in the light of evidence? And like, you can't. You go study Islam in a Western university, your Islam is done. As far as I'm concerned, you're basically just like, you're a harmless Muslim at that point.
So you and them would have a different reason for that. They'd say, well, that's because they're not accurately presenting it, or this is that. And you would say, actually, it's because they're actually looking at this thing and seeing what it really is. Yeah. And that's amazing. Just all it takes is a light switch in your brain to flick on or off. And what are you doing? How are you thinking about this? So thank you so much, man. Dude, I can't tell you how fun this was. I got to get you and AP on at some point to like harass. We got to harass each other and have fun. There's so much I need to do. There's just so many ideas that can come on a MythVision. So thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. Please help him out. Go subscribe to his channel. I guarantee you're going to exceed what you had previously on your channel.
Thank you.
It's going to grow, man. Just keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it. This has been educational, fun. Your story is an interesting one. It's amazing what you've learned and how far you've come. So I really appreciate you joining me.
Thank you, man. It's been lovely. Yeah, this was definitely, we were definitely vibing. Like I think there's a lot that you have to say, which maybe, you can come on my channel and talk about, because I want to hear more from your side. There was a couple of, you dropped a couple of bombshells there. I was like, whoa, that's some good stuff there. So I'd love to hear more as well from your side. So maybe we can arrange a counter discussion on my channel. It'd be cool. Good to know, because you apparently, I think you've gone through a lot of what I've gone through, but you're letting me speak because obviously I'm your guest today. But I'd love to hear that as well.
Hey, I'd love to, man. 100%. I'll share the content here on MythVision, meaning I'll, on the community tab, I'll let my audience know whenever that happens, if you ever want to have me on. And we will come over there and we will support you. We'll come subscribe and like your channel. And, I think it's important we have communication, even if there's disagreements. I'd be happy to have conversations with people I totally disagree with on subjects, and that's fine. Even David Wood. As much as I think some of the stuff he says, I'm like, dude, you couldn't say anything crazier. Like, if it weren't for Christianity, he'd go murder people and stuff. I just wish he never said some stupid stuff like that. But he's a smart guy when it comes to Islam and like learning about this stuff. So let's do this again, man. I'm super excited. And thank you for everybody who super chatted, who liked, who commented, who's added value. The haters are going to hate. Thank you for hating. I appreciate you for joining today. Go subscribe to this channel and never forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision.